Hello, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. My name is Deb Hackathorn. I'm a member of CMC's Board of Trustees, and I am also the head of Ohio Civic Point, which is the government affairs arm of Frost Brown Todd Law Firm. Today's forum, with a very interesting title, Andy, Servants, Companions, and Dinner, the Human-Animal Relationship. It is presented today in partnership with the Ohio Agricultural Council. They are represented here by many friends and associates. Please join me in thanking them for their support. From our earliest days as humans and animals, they have coexisted and been codependent. Dogs and humans, we know, evolved together, and the domestication of livestock marked the earliest paths to settlements and civilization. We generally take for granted the nuances of our complicated relationships with animals, but they are fascinating and always changing. Here to explore these issues with us, please welcome this group of experts. Doctor of Veterinary Medicine and Diplomate, American College of Veterinary Behaviorists, and an Associate Professor with the Department of Veterinary Clinical Sciences at the Ohio State College of Veterinary Medicine, Megan Herron. The Executive Director of Canine Companions for Independence from our North Central region, Megan Kester. Chair of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences with the Department of Animal Sciences at The Ohio State University, John Foltz. And finally, Dean of The Ohio State University College of Veterinary Medicine and the Ruth Stanton Chair in Veterinary Medicine, Rustin Moore. Dean Moore is going to provide some opening remarks, and then he will lead our conversation. Take it away.
Great. Well, hello and good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Thank you for coming out on what some considered a really bad weather day. We really look forward to engaging you in a very interactive, interesting, and informative panel discussion. I would like to thank everyone here for the invitation, and certainly people that I know contributed, which is Carol Newcomb-Aludo, as well as Andy Campbell and others. And there's a lot of our partners here in the room, whether it's the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences, Ohio Farm Bureau, Columbus Humane, and many, many more. I'll begin by providing some brief background foundational information that I hope will set the stage for a very robust discussion, and perhaps share some startling facts, things that I was startled by as I started preparing for this. I'll also then start by engaging this esteemed expert panel here in some questions that hopefully will be thought-provoking for you and also raise your curiosity. During the last 15 minutes, we will have some real fun because we will unleash you, no pun intended, in answering some very challenging questions in more of a cross-examination style event. And I do, as host and moderator, reserve the right to defer, delegate, or ask you to answer your own question. So we'll explore the complexity and interconnectedness of human-animal relationships today, ranging from our reliance on them for food and nutrition, particularly a source of protein, companionship, and as service animals. And we will likely only be able to touch the surface of this. This is a very broad topic to cover in an hour, but we're sure to hope to make it stimulating. As we explore various topics regarding this bond with today's panelists, it should become clear that it involves a complex spectrum along this human-animal relationship, including dependencies and perhaps actually competing interests and conflicting perspectives. I'm going to start by talking about the human-animal bond, and there are many definitions for that. The one I tend to like is that it refers to a mutually beneficial and dynamic relationship between people and animals that's influenced by the behaviors that are essential to the health and well-being of both. And certainly some might say that's more relevant to the pet-human-animal relationship, but certainly I think even in the other aspects that we talk about. In many situations, the pet is the most important part of a family structure, and many times it's the most stable and the most meaningful and perhaps the only good relationship a person has. I'm sure a lot of you can attest to that. You probably confide in them things you don't confide in other members of your family. Some interesting things is that most of you may know a woman who is in a situation of domestic violence typically will not leave that situation for fear of what will happen to the pet, and homeless people will not give up their pets to go into shelter. That, to me, signifies a pretty powerful bond that they will take care of the pet before themselves. So with that, I want to ask how many people here in the room currently have a pet? Raise your hand. Now, keep them up. Everybody who has also had a pet but doesn't have one now. Okay, now, down. How many have never had a pet? My neighbor back there has never had one, but guess what? His son right beside him has two, because he's my next door neighbor, so it's in the family. That's good. So actually, approximately 70 households in the U.S. have at least one pet or companion animal, which is a significant number. And in 2017, there were over 95 million cats and almost 90 million dogs that were owned and in households, which is pretty significant. And actually, in a poll in 2016, 95% of pet owners considered their pet part of the family, some of them more important than their human counterparts. More than 75% of children actually have pets, and here is a really startling and sad statistic to me. Children are more likely to grow up in a household with a pet than with their biological father or siblings. So think about that. And you can imagine the importance of that pet in that child's life as it's growing up. And to that point, 7 and 8-year-old children actually view pets as more likely to provide them with self-confidence, serve as a confidant, and provide them with enhanced self-esteem. So clearly pets provide a great benefit. Actually, in the U.S., in this past year, people spent almost $75 billion on their pets. Only 25% of that was for veterinary services. The rest was food, clothes, costumes, airfare, spa, daycare, toys, and yes, I do that. So that's something that's pretty important purely from a financial perspective. I do want to mention that because of that, the power and strength of that bond, I'm really proud of Columbus. Franklin County's only domestic violence shelter is moving to a new location, and I don't know how many of you have seen the article, but they will provide kenneling space for pets of those individuals, and I want to give a shout out to Rachel Finney, the CEO of Columbus Humane, who played a big role in that. That shows to me that Columbus is progressive in that area as they are in many other areas. Real quick, want to move on to ZUEA. It's a fancy term used that shows that there's an increased health benefit on people by interacting with an animal. It could be for intermittent periods of time, physically, emotionally, socially, psychologically, behaviorally, etc. And there's a lot of evidence I could go through, which I don't have time for, but certainly maybe if you're interested during questions, certainly in the areas of autism, Alzheimer's, dementia, and post-traumatic stress syndrome, among others. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about briefly is, why is this important? It's important because, in my mind, the healthcare professions don't really understand the importance of that, and I'm talking about non-veterinary healthcare professions. They're starting to learn more about it, and the more we can educate them about the importance of this, the better our health will be. And I have a number of action items that certainly anyone interested I could talk to you about. But because this is not about me, it's about our panel, I wanted to move on. I'm going to start with some startling facts, and these are really going to be geared toward John to start with.
Because I provided them. No?
You did, but I actually chose some other ones. So, the U.S. produced 52 billion pounds of meat in 2017. The average person in a year in the U.S. consumes 222.2 pounds of meat per person. If you look at, I think the way I interpret this next quote, or this next stat is, this is in hamburger equivalents, not true hamburgers. But the average American will eat the equivalent of 800 quarter pounders in a year, or 2.4 per day. I only eat 2. Estimates are that we will be adding 1 million people per week to the world population for the next 40 years, and we'll need to produce more food over the next 40 years than we have in the last 500 because of the reliance on animal-based protein. And in 2016, over 40 billion food animals were produced to help feed a population of over 7 billion people, resulting in trillions of pounds of animal-based protein being produced. And that's projected to increase 50% by 2025. So with that, John, I have some questions for you. With all of that information that I just shared with you, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about how and why society's outlook on farm animals or livestock have changed in the past several decades, and how has the market responded to some of those shifts to address those needs?
So, great question, Dean Moore. So the preface that you heard from the Dean talked about how our outlook on animals has changed. And when people find out that I'm the chair of the Animal Sciences Department at Ohio State, I tell them that society's relationship with animals is very complicated. And it was indicated by the title of our presentation today, servants, pets, dinner, okay? That's a spectrum. And it's becoming more complicated today because when I first started teaching my first class at a university, 2% of America's population was involved in production agriculture. Today it's less than 0.5%. And so people love what's served on our plates, but they kind of don't know how it got there. I mean, they do, but actually surveys show that they don't. You know, you go to the grocery store and you buy a steak and people don't really think of that as coming from a cow or a steer. And so that's actually good and bad. It's great for us in agriculture that we have done such a good job of producing it, but then people disassociate it with where it came from. So to your question, I think that complex relationship that we have presents some real challenges. Dean Moore outlined the fact that we've got to feed more people today. And what do we know about people in developing nations? As they get more income, they want to eat higher on the hog, literally and figuratively, which means more animal protein. And so we at Ohio State are engaged in helping make that happen with new technologies and new research. But we're also challenged to do that in a fair and equitable manner, both for sustainability and for the animal. And so that, I think, is what has changed, Rustin. I started my career after I graduated from Ohio State. I worked for Ralston Purina. You folks are familiar with them, the checkerboard company. I sold livestock feed. And our measure of efficiency in livestock production at that point was, are they producing lots of meat, milk, and eggs? Animal welfare was not a measure that was part of that measurement. Today, that is not the case. We have faculty in my department that do research in the animal welfare area. Society wants us to do things a little differently. They want to make sure that we treat our animals well, that we give them plenty of space, that we maybe allow them to interact in the environment like they would in nature. So I'll use poultry. We ate chicken today for lunch. A lot of movement towards colony cage rather than just small cage layers so that they can interact in a setting more similar to what they would in the wild, where there's an actual pecking order. That's where that comes from, is poultry. And so put them in a larger cage where they're allowed to do that. But what the trade-off there is efficiency. And so we as a society have to be okay with that. So to your question, things have changed both in terms of societal outlook and what society is asking from us. And I know we have some friends in the ag industry out here. That's what we deal with, is society are the consumers that we provide our products for. And as an economist, I say that we need to listen to them because that's who buys our products. But sometimes it's a challenge to implement what people want. And I've got more things that we can share, but that's probably enough on that question right now.
I
think I can add.
Well, good. I was just going to call on you.
Add a little bit to
Megan.
that. I think looking at from a welfare standpoint and the public perception of what is humane for livestock and what is actually humane, there's a disconnect there. This move towards group housing, move towards free range versus cage. I mean, there are pros and cons, and those sorts, it needs to be done right. I mean, I'm an advocate for animal welfare, clearly, but it needs to be done correctly. I visited farms that have done, group housing for calves, and their welfare was worse than those that were stall cage because they weren't doing it right. So it's not just a movement towards, this seems right, this feels right, but it might not be right. And so it's very complicated. And I think it's great that we have this interconnect between behavioral specialists who know normal natural behaviors and inclinations for these animals and coming together with those working in welfare as well as in the livestock communities and all partnering together so that it's done humanely and done correctly, not just, well, we need to meet this quota of it must live with 4 other animals, because just doing that isn't right? They can injure each other.
A great point.
It's
The
slippery,
health,
right?
all of those sort of things. And so the challenge is it's very complex because sometimes people only focus on one area. But I have yet to meet a livestock producer or a farmer that says, I mistreat my animals.
Right.
They want them to be handled and dealt with fairly in a humane way. They want them to be healthy, and some of the things that we're asked to do are not good from a health standpoint, and that is animal welfare.
Just as a follow-up question, I think related to this is obviously there's a need for more livestock production to feed this growing population. But could you speak also about perhaps some of the risks, certainly around the globe? 1 in 4 illnesses in people is foodborne illness. And what do veterinarians or what do animal scientists do to help prevent that and preserve food safety and security?
So great area, an area of huge debate right now, antimicrobial resistance. There's a lot of stones that people throw. So sometimes the medical community says it's all the livestock people that are at fault, and some of our people in the livestock community say, oh, it's all the physicians that wrote scripts for the cold that the soccer mom wants, and it wouldn't have affected it anyway, but it causes antibiotic resistance. So bottom line is, it's a very important problem. It's something that we're working on addressing through management. But to your point, zoonotic diseases that can pass back and forth from animals to livestock and vice versa are of a concern. Antimicrobial resistance is a huge issue. I was speaking at the table before lunch. The veterinary feed directive that recently came out is attempting to control that to some extent. And so there are things that we can do from a management standpoint that can assist and make sure that we don't have to use as much antibiotics in our feed. I will say that when I started with Purina, we regularly put antibiotics in our feed because it is a scientific fact that it is a growth promotant. You can get more efficiency by having an animal on a medicated feed. The downside of it that we didn't know 30 or 40 years ago is that you have antibiotic resistance that comes as a result of that. And so today we've really put the brakes on that. The veterinary community is assisting us in our research in our department. We're looking at those sort of things and we take it very seriously. And so we're trying to come up with other ways that we can deal with that. Microbiota, we've got faculty that are looking at gut health, and are there things that we can do microbiologically that can prevent us from having to use antibiotics?
I'm really glad that you didn't say that people blame veterinarians, just the human health care and the agricultural side.
There's plenty enough blame to go around. It just depends on who's throwing the
Actually,
tomatoes.
it was a good opening just to say that actually it takes everybody. It takes the veterinarians who are prescribing for animals. It takes the people working in animal production agriculture. And it takes everybody in the human health care, not just physicians, pharmacists, nurses, and others. And I'm very proud that at Ohio State we have one of the nation's, if not the world's, leading group of people across many colleges, including food, ag, and environmental sciences, nursing, medicine, pharmacy, vet med, and others. So I'm glad you touched on antimicrobial resistance. I want to move on to Actually, I'll move on to Megan Kester, since Dr. Heron was already kind enough to step up and say a few things. So Megan, I learned recently reading some information that canine companions here in the North Central region receives about 1,500 applications per year for a service dog. We here in Columbus, or in the North Central region, we are able to place about 50 to 60 per year. It does, so what happens is puppies are born, purpose bred. At 8 weeks of age, they are adopted or fostered by a puppy raiser for 18 months. Then they go through a very sad ceremony. I've been to them, and first one I didn't take Kleenex. After that, I take a lot of it. Those puppy raisers give that puppy back after 18 months. It goes into another 6 to 9 months of training, and then it go like this one gets ready to get paired. And it costs about $50,000 to train one to get it to that point, and certainly the people who are paired don't get charged for that. So knowing that and knowing some of the struggles, but also some of the successes. I would like to know if you could let the audience know, how do you think a service animal impacts individuals differently than a pet or a companion? And also, what is the difference between an emotional support animal and a service animal?
Great question, and this is a big question that we answer often. So, a service animal is defined as a dog or an animal that provides a service to someone with a disability. And an emotional support animal provides a lot of things and a lot of care and a lot of attention, but isn't actually trained to do it. It's just the natural bond that takes place between animals and humans that we are so grateful to now be studying and understanding at a much higher level. So for us, defining that difference is a big deal because it means the world to our graduates. Those 50 or 60 graduates that we will have this year from our 14-state region are graduating because they need that dog every single day to help them get ready for their day, or to take public transportation, or to go to the hospital for their medical treatments, or to go to dinner with their family, or to go to school, or to go to the airport. And so that dog is there with them to help them do tasks to get through each piece of that. And that's really important, and these dogs are specifically trained for 2 years to do that. The human is only trained for 2 weeks. So we want those dogs just right to pair with that human. On the other side of that, though, with emotional support animals, they do an amazing set of things for people, but they're not trained necessarily to be in public. So when that graduate goes to dinner and someone has brought their pet prior to that, or another animal that hasn't been trained, all of a sudden that graduate is met with a lot of resistance. Graduate walks into a facility, oh, you can't be here, no dogs allowed. Well, that's not actually legal according to the American Disabilities Act. And by the way, this is a fully trained service dog. So it has created an issue where our graduates on any given day, and more than once a month, 60% of our graduates are stating now that more than once a month they are out in public and they are confronted with a situation where either a pet dog is out, and that is fine, just not able to interact well with the service dog, which causes a commotion and disrupts things, and or walks into a facility that has had a bad experience and is now challenged with wanting to let the graduate and the service dog together. So in the service dog industry, we recognize and count on so much of the emotional benefits that naturally happen between human and animals, but we are training these animals to take that 3, 5, 10 steps further to actually help with that day, with that anxiety, with the crowds around you, and with how they operate day in and day out. And that is a challenge that we have in helping the population understand that there is a place for pets, there's a place for emotional support animals, there's a place for service animals. They are all crucially important. They also all have their place where they're meant to be.
Well, if I can jump in on that, Rustin. So our department has a pre-vet track. Many of the graduates from our department end up going to veterinary school at Ohio State or other veterinary schools around the country. And while traditionally our department has focused on animal science from a livestock standpoint, I will say that we have broadened what we're looking at as well. And so we partnered with the College of Veterinary Medicine. We've started a new center in our department called CHAIR, that stands for the Center for Human-Animal Interaction Research and Education. Co-director Dr. Kelly George is here today. But Zoea is one of the pillars of that: companionship, species conservation, and animal welfare. And only one of those really covers the area that we traditionally have been in livestock. The other three areas cover some of these broader areas here.
And to the point that 50 or 60 will graduate out of those 1,500 applications, we're pretty specific on who's going to become a service dog. But those that don't make it, it's just not this job that they're ready for, but they very well become an emotional support dog or a great pet. So they have those entities. We are actually partnering with universities and colleagues around the country too to understand how can we make these decisions, not just because we've spent a year, 2 years following this dog and understanding their temperament, but we're actually doing cognition testing and looking at, so when our dog walks up and wants to get the treat out of the box, if they can't do it and they sit down and look at their person in the room, they're going to be a great service dog. They're ready for that next command. If they're going to dig through it and try to get to it and going to figure it out, they're going to be a great dog. They just might not be a great service dog, and that's okay. But there's a lot that we're learning about that. We're actually looking at the microbiome, the longevity of a service dog, to place a service dog and to hope that they are going to work for 8 to 10 years for someone. It takes a long time to really build that partnership where these two are on autopilot, and we want them to work as long as possible. So the health and the well-being that we've learned from everyone in the industry is also helping us understand how we can create a longer lasting bond between that dog and that person.
And Megan, I think it's so important for you to share just how much goes into these dogs. I have clients very frequently say, all right, I'm here, I'd like my dog to be a service dog. And I always say service dogs aren't normal. They're not. They're abnormal and they're extraordinary dogs. And it starts with their genetics, right? I mean, there's so much goes into selecting the parents of these dogs because that temperament isn't typical, not whatsoever.
Yes.
So this Guchette's cutie here,
Yeah.
she's not your average Labrador.
Yeah. She's 1.5 and she's still laying down right here.
That's
so.
not normal, so don't expect
Asleep.
that from your Labrador.
My dog would not do that.
And to that point, I don't know how far afield you want to go, Rustin, but we have faculty that are looking at genetics and genomics related to that, and all of you are familiar with it. We've got these technologies today, the CRISPR technology. Can we use that for good or ill? I tend to think that we'll use it the proper way, but it can be used the wrong way as well. And specifically to your point, we had a graduate from our department that landed a very large Department of Defense grant to look at military dogs, bomb sniffing dogs, because the military spends $750,000 per dog to get those dogs trained, and it turns out that those dogs are a bit more genetically predisposed to cancer and some other issues, and they would like to figure out why and how that works and to figure out a way to stop that.
Okay, so I'm glad that this dog laying beside me is the only one here asleep. Or if you're sleeping, you at least have your eyes open. So I want to go back to Megan Herron, and I have a few questions. I'll try to lump them together because for the sake of time. So tell us about the guilty look. I swear my two dogs, who you very well know because they've been in behavioral training, Travis Lincoln and Teddy Luther, I swear to God, they are probably the smartest dogs ever, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Number one. But could you tell me more generally about dogs' cognitive abilities, and do they really understand when we talk to them?
Yeah. So the guilty look, I have this conversation almost daily, but he knows. He knows, and I can tell. I walk in the house and I know he's gotten in the trash. And I can speak from experience. I would walk in my house and I know there's trash all over my kitchen, just the way my dog is acting. And so how can they not know, you know? Or if I've tried to tell him, or I have clients, well, I rubbed his nose in it when he pooped in the house, so he should know better. I told him so. And so when you look at the dog brain and learning, they have a lot of limbic system, and they have a little bit less cerebral cortex than we do. So they make very, very good emotional connections, and they do make cognitive connections, and they can think they're problem solvers, but it's differently than we are. And so consequences for their behavior need to happen pretty darn quick, like within 1 to 2 seconds. And so I tell people, well, if there's a positive or beneficial consequence to their behavior, then they're probably going to do it again. So what was the benefit of getting in the trash immediately? Oh, that rotten leftover chicken tasted great. Or I really have to go, and peeing on your bed felt really good. And so that was that's what's going to keep that behavior going. Coming home 3 hours later and scolding them, yelling at them. Or sometimes some of our pets are so sensitive that just your disappointment, those of us who don't take it on our dogs or understand that we're still like, oh, I just washed that duvet and cover. I mean, this just happened to me last week. First my kid pees the bed, then my dog pees the bed. So it's a lot of laundry, and you can't help but go, inside. And some of our pets are that sensitive that they hunker down and walk away because they're that receptive to us. When dogs evolved through a process of domestication that involved staying close to humans, to showing those big eyes and those other neotenous characteristics or juvenile characteristics that drew us to them. So we get a nice dopamine release when we see that. So we become addicted to our pets. But they've learned through thousands of years what sort of behaviors appease us, what may settle us when we're feeling upset and angry, and that tilts of the head, puppy dog eyes, ears back. It's been processed through thousands of years to get that way. And I say the guilty look of people say, well, they know they did wrong, and they're not moral creatures, right? They learn from experience and consequences. And so Alexander Horowitz is a scientist who's done some great research on the guilty look and other cognition studies, and she did a test where, she had dogs in a room and there was food on the table, and she had the owners leave the room and then come back. And some of them, so the dogs never ate the treat in one experiment, but some of the owners were told that they did, and some were told that they didn't. It didn't necessarily mean the truth. And then they measured the dog's behavior based on that, and they still showed the guilty look, even if they didn't do it. So. And then I have a lot of clients, I'll say, we talk about house training, and, we talk about trying to set them up for success and interrupt behaviors rather than punish them when they discover them soiling, because you don't want to teach them to be afraid to eliminate in front of you. It's really going to hurt or hinder your house training. And I'll tell people, but he knows. I came in the house and I knew he had that, the dog shaming everybody puts up, the little pictures, I pooped in the house, or I chewed up my dog. They make me a little sad because these dogs actually, they don't quite understand why someone's upset with them, and they're showing these sort of appeasing behaviors because they're trying to mitigate, that sense of anger or disappointment in their owners. And I say, well, your dog's showing you the guilty look because he pooped on your bed, and I guarantee you, if you took, so I've seen dogs that they say it works, that sort of punishment. I say, well, I bet if you took another dog's poop and put it on your bed, he would still show the guilty look, because they make that association with you coming home and that poop being there, or trash on the ground, or anything that they've done in your absence. They've made the association that when you come home and that stimulus is there, they need to show these appeasing behaviors. So, and I've had people who've done that. They've actually taken another dog's poop, put it in their house.
I don't do that. My dogs don't do that.
Just to prove, they wanted to prove me wrong, but I was right.
So I want to tee up the audience for, in about 4 or 5 minutes, we're going to start Q&A. So start thinking about those questions that that were inspired by something that was said, something you agree with or you don't agree with. I want to ask Megan one other thing, and that's if she could talk a little bit about, so what we know is that there's about 1 million dogs a year that are euthanized or die because of behavioral problems. I would say the majority of those are in shelters, but also some of those happen in veterinary clinics because someone has acquired a dog and they just, for whatever reason, it doesn't fit the family because of behavioral issues. So could you maybe talk a little bit about why you think that is in terms of the cause? And do you see any change in that recently, and where do you see that going in the future?
No, great question. It's a devastating statistic. Behavioral problems are the leading cause of death of dogs in the United States, period, more than cancer. And I think you look at what keeps a dog in the home. It's the bond. It's the human-animal bond, and behavior problems are a big breaker of that. Cancer typically doesn't break the bond. Skin problems, unless they're super severe and stinky, might have an effect on the bond, but other chronic issues typically, they probably actually strengthen the bond, right? When we actually care for our pets, I think our bond grows tremendously. Yet caring for their behavior problems is a different story, very frustrating. There's a lot of financial damage. There's personal injury in some of these cases. I mean, for what I see, by the time a lot of my clients come to me, sometimes they sought help elsewhere, and so they're in really dire straits. And I've seen tens of thousands of dollars done to homes for dogs with separation anxiety, or not to mention thousands of dollars of injury from the dog who pushed out the air conditioning unit of a third story of a home and jumped out and broke several bones. Or dogs that have broken their jaws trying to escape out of crates, or just the frustration. I mean, a lot of people they just can't do it anymore. And sometimes it's not that serious. It's just a matter of being unruly. I can't walk him in the neighborhood because he's pulling on the leash. We get puppies, again, often when they're young and they're cute and they're easy, and then they don't come with an instruction manual, unfortunately, so we may not be able to guide them to be the best pet that they can be. I mean, a lot of these behaviors, these nuisance behaviors that cause them to lose their home are actually normal behaviors, and that is extremely the case, very much the case in cats as well. But with dogs, a lot of them are normal, natural behaviors. We just haven't taught them how to adapt to human lifestyle and how to be sort of a good citizen, which is why, again, speaks to my point of Kuchet's being very extraordinary, because this is not a normal, natural behavior to sit in a room of strangers and be completely calm and unaffected by it. It's natural for them to be curious and to jump and to vocalize and to paw and to mouth and explore with their mouth out of curiosity. We have to teach them differently in order to do that. So I think there's a disconnect there. Once that bond is broken, that's not a motivation necessarily to keep the dog, and often they're relinquished or euthanized. Very
Great.
sad.
So I want to start the Q&A with the audience by me asking a question. I asked you how many had pets. So how many of you have cats? Great. How many, keep them up, how many of you have had cats? How many of those people who have cats or have had cats would consider themselves vegan or vegetarian? Okay. So the question I have, because actually a meat-based diet is essential for a cat for a variety of biological evolutionary reasons. So if I were a vegan or a vegetarian, which I'm not because I ate that chicken, how would I reconcile the fact that I would morally prefer to be a vegetarian vegan, so animals don't have to die to be part of my food supply, with the fact that I have cats and that they have to eat meat? And if they're out in the wild, they're going to eat prey, which is birds and rodents and things like that. Most of them are in the house. They aren't eating those sorts of things. So how do this is almost a rhetorical question, but how do we think about that and reconcile that dilemma or that potential conflict? I hadn't thought about that until we were in an initial meeting planning this thing, and not one of our panelists, but someone else asked that, and I thought, that's a pretty interesting question. So I throw that out for you to think about, cat owners who are vegan or vegetarian. And now we're going to open it up for some great questions. I assume there's a microphone to step up to. I would ask you to state your name, maybe who you're with, ask it in the form of a question, not a statement, and tell me who you want it directed to.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Blake Rayfeld. My question is probably going to be directed mostly to Dr. Foltz. I grew up on a north central Ohio farm out of the 50s and 60s. We raised our own chicken, swine, dairy. So all of our protein came from what we raised on the farm, much different than the feedlot where much of the grocery store protein now comes from. My question relates to seems to be significant debate about free-range animals interacting freely with their environment versus the feedlot protein that is quite often on our shelves. Other than the antibiotic characteristics that you get from feedlot, is there any science that tells us there's a nutritional difference between the free-range, environmentally ranging livestock versus feedlot?
Wow, I think the quick answer is no. Now, my colleagues may disagree, but yeah, I think beef is beef. And so how they were raised does impact other things in terms of sustainability, whether they were raised with antibiotics or hormones or not. That wasn't really the basis of your question. It was feedlot versus home on the range. I'm not aware of any scientific studies that would say that there's any difference.
I don't know that there's scientific evidence, but certainly those beef that are raised in a feedlot are, the grain is poured to them like crazy. And I think in general tend to have a higher marbling or fat than grass-fed range.
So I would agree with that. Yeah, but that's a feeding regime as opposed, yeah,
I don't know, but it could have an impact on one's health in terms of cholesterol.
No, that's very true. And today you can buy grass-fed beef in the grocery store just like you can buy well-marbled beef, which was probably raised in a feedlot. And it's that trade-off of nutrition versus possible good nutrition versus taste and preference. So marbling does significantly, in fact, tenderness and taste, but it also adds to your fat and cholesterol level. So my response to many of the things that I was kind of anticipating from the audience was balance is important in life. Choice is a good thing, and the free market generally works. So all of those would maybe address your question that people have the choice today to buy either feedlot fed beef or free range or a whole variety of different things. So to Dr. Moore's point, yeah, I think nutritionally there could be differences based on what the animals were fed.
So we have about 10 minutes left, so it'd be nice to get at least the 3 questions of the people standing. So we'll go through those quickly with sort of concise answers, and maybe more people could step up to the mic.
Hi, I'm Bill Lafayette, owner of Regionomics, and I guess my question's for Dr. Foltz, too. I'm well aware of the big decline in agricultural employment as a result of increasing efficiencies. But do you notice workforce shortages in agriculture as in many other industries, and can you talk about those?
So again, like the previous question, the short answer is yes. We do see significant shortages in a lot of agricultural operations for a whole number of reasons that we can talk about over cookies afterwards. But part of it is the type of employees that many of our integrated livestock operations are looking for. And so actually our dean who is here, Dean Kathann Kress, has put together a workforce development task force of which I'm a member, looking at some of those issues of how we help to serve our stakeholders. And so yeah, it's a challenge and it's the trade-off. Bottom line is it's do you trade capital for labor? And so one of the things that I'm putting a push on is to put in a robotic milking system at our dairy on campus that will put some students out of work. But from an efficiency standpoint and from a data standpoint, it's amazing the amount of data that it generates. So anyway, it's supposed to be quick, sorry.
Next.
Yes, thank you for coming. This was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. You touched on service dogs, that the law requires apartment owners and airplanes and so on to allow the service dog, and I think that's very just. But I noticed there's been quite a bit of abuse with emotional support dogs. In fact, you can get on the internet and get a collar that says, for your dog, that says emotional support. And in many high-density apartments, for example, it's not practical to have a 110-pound dog. My dad used to say, big shovel, big dog. What are the laws concerning emotional support dogs compared to service dogs?
Great question, and actually some of them are still being put into play. So the ADA, talks about what a service dog can do, and then that does differ along with emotional support animals are supported in airlines and in housing. So they're still working on defining where emotional support dogs can go. We have a governing body, the Assistance Dogs International, which helps govern the training that is required and the public access testing that is required to deem a dog a service dog. They are now putting together an international format to further define where emotional support dogs should and should not be able to be around, because it's become something that our country is just now seeing a lot more. I will tell you, we've seen this in Europe and in other countries for several years, but it's now more prominent here, and we're trying to find those places. There's also a deviation between an emotional support dog and a therapy dog. So an emotional support dog is a dog that we own, that we are utilizing to help ourselves, and a therapy dog is maybe a dog that I own, but I have trained to become a therapy dog that I'm now taking to hospitals or assisted living entities, and they are providing that comfort and emotional support. So the longer the conversation goes on, the more deviations we receive. And then the other problem is when we look at how do we verify that this is a service dog, we have not been able to do it at the federal level. So it is still state by state that we are going through and passing legislation in order to say, we want this patch to be prominent to say this is in fact a supported assistance dog entity. So it is a challenge and a place for advocacy for us right now.
Great, thank you. Next, please.
Thank you. Lori Overmeyer, proud lifetime member of CMC. This question is for Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore, I'm struck about the kindness that our veterinarian shows us relative to our cats and the very difficult conversation we had to have several years ago when one of our cats had to be put to sleep. I'm very familiar with your program that you do with Life Care Alliance, where you have the senior pet program and the veterinary students go in and help seniors with their pets. Do you give them any special training regarding some of those difficult conversations that they may need to have with seniors about whether there is the feasibility of that animal continuing in the home or the health of the animal?
Sure. Everybody heard the question, I think. So the short answer is yes. We've had an outreach medicine program since 2009, primarily working through Life Care Alliance with homebound, typically elder and medically challenged, because the pet is the most important thing in their life. They don't have access, they don't have transportation, and we've done that and done it well. We've actually, in the last 2 to 3 years, went from 1 day a month helping that organization to 4 days a week helping 7 community organizations with vulnerable populations of people. That's homeless, homebound, low income, HIV/AIDS, and elders. We actually teach communication training in our curriculum, and it's communication training around difficult conversations, whether it's euthanasia, whether it's I don't have the money, what do I do? But we also now partner with the College of Social Work, and they go in with us, and starting soon we have a grant that the College of Nursing, the College of Social Work, and the College of Veterinary Medicine will all go in those homes, and this starts with Life Care Alliance. So the nursing folks can help from the healthcare perspective, social work can help from the social services perspective, and we can start and continue to do what we do. Because we were getting all these questions about social services and things which, we're typically, although we're great, we're not equipped to sort of deal with. So it's a wonderful program, broad throughout the city. More and more people are coming out wanting that, and it's really important for our students. Now, our faculty, they're with them. It's not they're in there by themselves. But I really want to stress it gives 3 things in addition to medical experience. It raises social awareness, it builds cultural competencies, and it instills civic responsibility. So when they graduate and go off into their careers, they are going to be doing that in their communities.
Hi, Steve Heiser, and I would like to say that my wife and I are proud supporters of the OSU College of Veterinary Medicine. But I would like to ask you, if you have multiple animals, multiple dogs or dogs and cats, how does that change the dynamics of the animals and of the humans in the family?
Excellent and complicated question. I don't have a short answer for that. I mean, living with multiples is always going to pose a challenge. Just like the more people, more roommates you have, the more conflict you're going to have, or more potential for conflict. Most of us who are animal lovers are multiple animal lovers. So we have multiple cats and multiple dogs, or living with dogs and cats, and I can actually show you a great video of my dog and cat wrestling and chewing on each other, which isn't always the case. Sometimes our pets can be a threat to each other. I mean, I guess starting with cats, because we have a lot of multi-cat homes that we see, and a lot of people think that cats are naturally asocial, and that actually isn't the case. Cats are social creatures. If you look at the colonies of feral cats living out there, they're actually very large groups if allowed to get to that point. So they are social creatures. I think a lot of times we get them and we don't socialize them well, so maybe they aren't used to living with other cats. But if you have cats around other cats or they're pretty young, they actually can do quite well together. Studies have shown that the younger they are when they're introduced, and if they're related, they have a better chance of getting along. And I always just talk about, cats. When you look at the wild ancestor of a cat compared to today's cat, you can't really tell the difference. So physiologically and anatomically, they haven't changed a whole lot, and so behaviorally, they haven't changed a lot either. So living in an indoor environment can sometimes be a challenge for cats, and then putting them in multiples, it gives the social benefit, but there's a lot more resources to contend over. And so I tell people to think about multiples. Anything that's important to a cat, whether it's food, whether it's water, attention from their people, litter boxes, perches, toys, it needs to be a multiple. So that's good. That's the biggest source of conflict for cats living together, is some sort of access to resources. And a lot of people don't realize that. Well, I just have one big bowl or one big litter box and that's good enough. It just takes one cat to displace all the other cats from that one litter box, and then suddenly you have a pee in your house problem. So, which is the #1 behavior reasons that cats lose their home too. And sometimes it's just as simple as, well, let's just add another litter box on the other side of the house. So a little bit long answer for your question, but we can accomplish it, but it takes some work.
Great. One more final question.
Question relates to the issue of support dogs versus service dogs. And as a parent of a dog that we would like to take on a vacation, but I don't want to buy one of the collars on the internet, what advice can you give on what to do or not to do if you want to put your dog on the airline to go with you where you're going?
My advice is to call the airline, because they are all handling it differently right now, right in this very minute. So please, depending on who the carrier is, make the phone call and let them know the animal that you have and where you'd like to go and what that looks like, and they can tell you what they're providing. Now, you may want to choose which airline you take based on those answers. So those phone calls may happen before you book your tickets. But right now, each of the carriers are handling this a little differently. I will tell you, even for us. So we have a regional training center here in Central Ohio where our puppy raisers turn their dogs in for professional training here. When we are evaluating and learning these dogs, some of these dogs will be great hearing dogs, which is a different temperament. And with that training for us happens in Florida. So for sending them to Florida is even a challenge for us in carriers. So call your carrier or call your airline and ask them, and then choose who to fly with.
A chartered flight sometimes works.
That definitely works.
We got friends at Wheels Up. That would be the reason.
Wheels up, NetJets,
Call
yes.
them, they love animals.
Hi, just a real quick food question. I know that we've heard a lot about the economic impact, the environmental impact of the beef industry, and if the whole world wants to eat beef, is that really a reality? We've also heard about test tube meats or petri dish meats. Is this for real? Is that something that could actually happen?
So, great question. I think we got just a minute to take it. So I know we've got some people here that are cattle ranchers. My answer to that is that choice is a good thing, and it is coming, and that competition is a good thing. So here 2 weeks ago, Chobani, the largest yogurt maker in the United States, announced that there's a non-dairy yogurt that they are producing now. Andrew, who asked the question, said, wow, I didn't know about that. It's coconut milk based. I will say that those things will become available. Last week, I was in San Francisco, California, toured one of those facilities where they're making cell-cultured or tissue-cultured meat. It will be a choice. And as a behavioral social scientist, I think you have to decide what's going to win and what truth is there. Sustainability is a part of it. They're pushing that this is potentially more sustainable, but at what cost? So Just was the company that we toured. They had, based on plant protein, they have a mung bean egg replacement today that you could not tell the difference between regular eggs, but the equivalent is $17 a dozen. Okay, so that's the trade-off that people have to deal with. And then there's the thing of, oh, I don't like science and GMOs, I love sustainability. Okay, so are you going to eat cultured meat? Because there's a lot of science that went into that. So would I eat it? Sure, I'll eat it, but I like my steak. Thanks.
So I'd like to thank all of you again for being here and for being so engaged. Certainly thank our panelists. I hope you found it engaging. I hope you walk away with some questions answered, but many more, so that maybe we could get invited back sometime. So thank you very much.
So we hope you found today's forum meaty. Come on, I had to come up with something. Thanks again to our partners, the Ohio Agricultural Council, for their sponsorship today. And finally, let's thank our panelists, Megan Herron, Megan Kester, John Foltz, and Rustin Moore. Thank you for being here. We hope we see you next week.